Hi, my name is Julie Stigmeyer, and I work with the OWL, the Online Writing Lab at Concordia University, Irvine. In this video, I'm going to share some basics for APA in-text citations. Whenever we integrate research into our work, we need to make sure that we are including both the shorthand version of the source in the text, which we call an in-text citation, and the full reference on the reference page so that the reader can look up that source for themselves. So we have this one-to-one correspondence. What is in the in-text citations must appear in the references and vice versa. In terms of how to format according to APA, we will cite all facts and figures that you mention that are not common knowledge. This can include key background information, support for your thesis, or critical definitions. So basically, the guideline here is to cite pretty much all the time. So whenever you have something that you didn't come up with, that is not an interpretation of your own, in that case, you would want to cite. So in terms of APA, it uses the author date system. So this will be the last name of an author. It could also be a group author, like the CDC or the US Department of Education. If it's a name of an individual, we include no initials or first names, and no first names anywhere in an APA document, but definitely no initials in in-text citations. For dates, we typically include just the year unless there happens to be a month and day shown on the publication information. Just a little tip, if you're using a website like the California Department of Education, be sure to scroll all the way down to the end of the page because often you can see a copyright date. However, if you can't find one at all, you can use ND to indicate there's no date. And the last note is punctuation always goes outside the parentheses. So I'll show you some examples. If this source were only to include one author, we would show it like this. This is a parenthetical citation that you would add to the end of the sentence. I'll talk more about narrative citations in another video. So here's the end of the sentence, no period before the parentheses, the author's last name, comma, year, and then the period. Same thing here, but we're just using that ND for no date. And notice it has periods after each letter. So with two authors, we actually include both last names of the authors separated by this and symbol, the ampersand. So be sure to always use the ampersand in parenthetical citations. And then last, you can have three or more authors. So in that case, you'd put the last name of the first author with et al. Et al means and the others. It's a Latin abbreviation. This is actually short for alia. So that's why we put the period there. So no comma here after Kenny, just et space al period comma space and then the year. Keep in mind that, like I mentioned, we only use the last name of the author or authors, and periods go outside the parentheses. So now it's quiz time. So here's a sentence. Autistic character strengths include open-mindedness, creativity, and love of learning. Is the citation here correct or incorrect? It's actually incorrect because the period is misplaced. So we always make sure to add that period to the end of the parentheses. Here's another one. Finally, autism is associated with exceptional human performance. Is this correct or not? This is not correct because it includes the initials. So we do not include those initials in the in-text citation. We do need them though for the reference. Here's another one. Individuals with autism often have sensory advantages such as visual hypersensitivity. Is this citation correct? Well, if you look real close, you see, actually, we're missing the period after the AL. So that's important to include. Here's another. One helpful skill that can strengthen an organization is to analyze how systems operate. Is this correct for a citation? Yes, we finally have a correct example. And then last, SEL can be an effective intervention to help children develop problem solving and decision-making skills. Stevens, Bailey, Lee, and Kim, 2021. Is that correct? No, we should use at all in this situation, even from the first reference. An old guideline from APA 6 was to include all the names, all the last names in the first time they're mentioned, and after that you could use at all. But that's no longer the case. With APA 7, we always use at all for 3 or more authors. One other quick note, if you're writing a paragraph that's all basically from one source, you want to be able to cite that. However, we don't cite it at the end of every sentence. So it would be considered over-citation to put this citation after the second and third sentences. The understanding with APA is that you cite at first mention in the paragraph, and then you don't have to cite that same source as long as you're continuing to paraphrase from there, unless you start a new paragraph or unless you change sources. So since this paragraph is all from this one source, this source appears at first mention and then covers the rest of the paragraph. So as a reminder, we ensure you have a one-to-one correspondence between in-text citations and references. Cite every claim, even if it's something you learned in school or something that you're not sure. Be sure to find a source for it. That will increase your scholarly, your attention to scholarly detail and your credibility. Always use the author date system and correct punctuation to set up your citations. And then for long paraphrases, place the citation early in the paragraph at first mention and do not recite until the next paragraph. And all of this was pulled from the APA manual. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this has been helpful as you are citing your research. Happy writing!